Welcome to the Gut Show. I'm Erin Judge, registered dietitian and founder of Gut Debate, and I will be your host. My goal on this side of the internet is to empower those with IBS and digestive disorders to understand their guts better, to have a healthier relationship with their bodies, and make confident choices to improve their digestive health. During this season of the Gut Show, you can expect a weekly conversation covering a hot topic related to health, digestion, and IBS. As a disclaimer, I am a dietitian, but I'm not your personal dietitian. Everything we cover in this episode is meant to be educational and not a substitute for personalized care from your healthcare team. Welcome, and let's dive into today's episode. Are FODMAP troubles keeping you from enjoying your favorite foods? Our sponsor, FODZYME, can help you add these foods back to your diet. When sprinkled on or mixed into high FODMAP meals, FODZYME's novel enzyme blend breaks down the FODMAPs fructan, GOS, and lactose into easily digestible carbohydrates so that you can enjoy your meals without the worry. Learn more at FODZYME.com and use the code GUTSHOW to save 20% off any single order. Does it seem like no matter what you do online, no matter where you search, whether that be social media, whether that be a Google search, even if you're looking at research through PubMed or another scientific journal, does it seem like there are so many contradicting opinions, contradicting advice, tips, experts that are out there, especially around IBS and digestive health? If you have felt that way, you're not alone, because it's really real. It's something that I've seen in my own work. It's something I experienced in becoming a dietitian, where it just seems like the health space, there's just contradiction after contradiction after contradiction. And that can make it really hard to know as a consumer or as a patient what to do about it, right? Even as a practitioner, it can be hard to navigate that information. But as someone who is not the practitioner, someone who's just trying to feel better or get answers, it can make you feel lost and overwhelmed and not knowing who to truly trust or what to believe. And this has been heightened even more post-pandemic, what we've seen with the distrust of governing authorities and even professional organizations. There's been even more divide in these contradictions, leading to, yes, a rise in misinformation, but also I think crippling of the consumer and the patient from being able to even make decisions for themselves. So if you found yourself in this place where you are feeling kind of crippled, you feel like you don't know where to look or where to turn, you don't know who to trust, then this episode is for you. I'm not going to tell you exactly who to trust or what to do, because at the end of the day, I am not you. I am not your personal healthcare provider. I am not the person who gets to determine how you live your life, right? That's not my place. But what I do hope to do is talk a little bit more about why these contradictions exist, how to navigate them, and how to search out the people that you are choosing to trust and choosing to follow, the advice that you're choosing to apply for yourself, and then kind of how to build from there. So that is my goal. I hope that that is where we get together. And this episode is really meant to be a true conversation. So I hope that at the end of the episode that you share your thoughts as well with me. You can do that on social media at erinjudge.rd. All of that's in show notes. But I would love to hear kind of what you have to say and what you think about this topic. So first off, why do these contradictions exist? And who are the people sharing these tips, right? The contradictions themselves, they exist for a lot of different reasons. One being the information that the people who are sharing that information, like where that's coming from for them. But we also see these contradictions in science itself and in our history in terms of health knowledge in science. We used to believe that a high-fat diet was bad no matter what, right? Fats were bad, everything needed to be low fat. We learned in the years following, after the huge craze of low fat was already hitting the market and the shelves, that wasn't actually true, that healthy fats were actually really helpful for health outcomes, and that there were certain fats, like saturated fats and more like trans fats, that maybe weren't as beneficial, and that over processing foods more to be low fat maybe wasn't the right answer because these foods maybe have more sugar. Now we're seeing a huge rise in sugar is the enemy and everything should be sugar free, and that's leading to excess fat in a lot of products. So we're getting further and further away from balance because science evolves and consumers in the market, in terms of what people are selling, that evolves and it impacts the information that we get. And so science can't always change, right? Science supported low-fat diet. Then we got more science that helped us make sense of it. A great example of this when it comes to the gut digestive health is that for a while we were getting a lot of research around the gut microbiome, and we learned about certain key microbes in the gut that might be beneficial. Well, from that, we learned that there are probiotics out there that could be added, right? Live microorganisms that we knew worked well in the gut. We could add them to foods. We could put them in capsules and sell them as probiotics, and that might be beneficial for the gut. And we believed at that time, as the science community, that these microbes would kind of take up residence in the gut. So they were highly recommended. Now, as we have more research about the use of probiotics, we actually don't recommend them as much as we used to because the research doesn't actually support it. And what now we're seeing is that it may not be that they take up residence, but different microbes have different impacts on our gut itself, and they can influence our gut community differently. And so in the future, the science will continue to evolve and likely tell us that our own microbiome communities that we have right now, our makeup of microbes now, would determine what type of targeted probiotics or microbes that we add into the mix that will then give us the benefit, right? It's not going to be this broad scale of everyone should take a probiotic, like we said, maybe 5 to 10 years ago. So science continues to evolve, and that influences the information that is put out there, which leads to a lot of contradictions. Now, what we're going to focus the most on are the people sharing the information and where they're getting it, right? Because that's the bulk of the contradictions that you actually see whenever you do a Google search or you're scrolling through social media. You're not necessarily seeing all the scientific articles that might have, evolved over time or may contradict each other because of small changes in the study design, whether it's good quality or not in humans or mice or rats. There's a lot of differences there, but we're going to talk more about the people that are sharing it and where that's really coming from. So whenever you're looking at people sharing information online, typically they're going to either share it from a personal experience or a clinical or professional experience. And it's really important as a consumer of that information to know, is this coming from a personal experience or a clinical or professional experience? Meaning there's training, there's mentorship, there's actual experience with other people living with this problem or condition, not just a personal experience with the problem or condition. Whenever you know where something is coming from in terms of someone sharing information, you're going to be more easily able to take what you need from that. So an example of someone sharing information from a personal experience would be, a person on the internet that had IBS themselves, and they made some changes to their diet. It helps them feel better. And so now they're taking that information and they're saying, okay, everyone who has IBS would benefit from these changes I made because I got over this myself, right? I cured this problem. I fixed this problem. You can too. Just do what I did. What's typically missing in that situation is knowing the why behind the action that you're taking and exactly how you're targeting an outcome. So if you're trying to see where someone's coming from, look at their experience and their history and see kind of, okay, where are these recommendations coming from? And try to figure out, are they able to share the why behind this action, right? Maybe they made the changes, and someone who has a personal experience can do this with additional training and expertise, right? So they may understand that, which is what you're trying to pull out as the gold. But what was the why behind the action? And then how do I use this action to target a specific outcome? Because then I'll know if that outcome is actually where I want to be. And that means that it's something I may take in. An example of where maybe this wouldn't be the case is that let's say a creator is on social media. They had IBS themselves, and it was in the form of constipation. And so what they found was that going to a fully plant-based, high fiber diet made their symptoms better. And so they share that and they say everyone with IBS should experience this. Well, knowing the why, so let's say this person maybe is a little bit more educated on their experience, right? So it's not just I did this and I got better, you should do this too. I don't know why it worked, right? They know why it worked. And they can tell you, well, I decreased saturated fats, which might, slow down the gut. I increased my fiber intake, which led to more bulkier stools that were easier to pass. Higher fiber also helped with my motility, helping me pass more stool. With my plant-based diet, I also increased a lot of laxative-like foods, including, kiwi and chia seeds and flax seeds that really help stimulate more movement. So what they're saying is the why behind it is the high fiber helped with motility. And then how they targeted the outcome is that they improved their ability to poop, right? So they pooped more. So if you're someone who's living with diarrhea, then you may look at that and say, that's great. I can take away that maybe right now where I am and what I need doesn't line up with that why or that outcome, right? Someone with a clinical or professional experience, when they're sharing information, and they may have a bit of both where they could say, that they did one thing, but the difference is instead of saying, I had this, I did this, you can do it too, the change is, okay, for those who deal with this problem, this recommendation is made because of this reason, whether that be science shows or like something behind it, right? There's a reason why this may happen. And this is what can be the outcome. For someone who deals with constipation, this is what can be done versus someone who deals with diarrhea, this is what can be done, right? Someone who's coming from a clinical or professional background in an area that you're looking for versus a personal background, they're going to have more of a depth of understanding of how different manifestations of that problem or condition would be treated differently and what all those treatment options would be so that you have more options to choose from that you can personalize to your condition or your experience, right? When someone is sharing from a personal experience, another thing that we often see that confuses the consumer is the presence of a placebo and a nocebo effect. So a placebo effect means if you expect a positive outcome from a change you make, you may have that outcome because you expect it. Nocebo effect is the opposite. If you expect a negative outcome, you may have that outcome. So a placebo effect, we see this often in research where you take a sugar pill, right? You're taking a pill that you think is the medication, but it's not. And then you still have the benefits because you believe that that's happening. Nocebo effect, a great example is that if you feel like, okay, bananas are going to trigger my symptoms, bananas are going to trigger my symptoms, you may eat a banana and have symptoms because you believed that the bananas were going to trigger your symptoms. This is really hard to fully pull apart and identify when it comes to lifestyle and diet modifications compared to like medication trials where it's really obvious what's a placebo or not. And this is something that I do see very often in the kind of public sharing spaces, so blogs and social media. Someone might have had a benefit for their condition or problem, or maybe they found a trigger that triggered more of their symptoms that they took away, right? Because of a placebo and nocebo effect. And if they don't have that clinical and professional experience to back it up with knowledge, again, with the why and what they're targeting, they may not have recognized that as a placebo or nocebo. So they may be giving you information of what they're claiming will work because of their experience without knowing why it worked. And then you may try it and it may not work the same way for you because maybe that placebo or nocebo experience and effect isn't happening as strongly for you as it did for them. And this is something I see so often, especially in the realm of supplements or really intense changes that people make. If they really believe it's going to work, sometimes that alone will make things better, which is its own phenomenon. And another thing that happens in these instances that you want to look out for are short-term benefits versus long-term outcomes. Oftentimes, when people are coming at you with a personal experience or even a really young professional experience, they may make recommendations that worked for them after a few weeks. So a great example is going to be let's say a plant-based diet. They switched to a plant-based diet and now they're saying, all my symptoms went away. I feel so much better. You want to start asking, how long did you do this change? And then how long have you had that symptom reduction or control since making that change? If they've only had symptom reduction for a couple of weeks, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be a benefit to the long-term outcome. So I use a plant-based diet as an example. I feel like one that we actually see very often out there right now is like the carnivore diet or keto diets, which are lacking in fiber. A lot of times in the short term, these types of diets, because they're taking away this fiber that's fermented by your gut microbes and can contribute to gas, as well as a lot of benefits, that may make symptoms feel better in the short term. So someone may say, I went carnivore, stopped eating all plants, and I feel so much better. So we'll ask, okay, how long have you been doing this change and how long have you been feeling better? If it's been like a month, okay, I want to see where they're at a year from now, because we know, again, a professional clinical experience background will tell you this is not sustainable long term for what we know the gut needs, right? We know that gut microbes, positive gut microbes, need fiber in order to produce beneficial byproducts that are going to help with digestion and health outcomes, right? We know that that's really important. We know that high saturated fat intake is linked to increased risk for disease across the board, as well as in the gut and dysbiosis in the gut. And so we have to understand the short-term benefits aren't always the key indicator that something is going to work long-term or be actually effective, right? Again, we have to know the why, and we have to know what we're targeting specifically with changes that we're making. And you're likely going to get that more from someone with more of a clinical and professional experience versus just a personal experience with the problem. If you're looking at, okay, who is going to be my guide here? Now, there are a lot of people that blend the two. And what typically will come from a blend is that they will have the depth of understanding to be able to personalize recommendations for you or give you the why, give you the outcome. But then with the personal experience, they may have more of that hope or empathy and understanding. So there's a difference between connecting on a personal level, which may be someone that you follow for a connection point, or maybe you look for someone with both in order to find that connection point, versus someone just using their personal experience to guide you in a way that's not going to be personalized to you, nor maybe have as much depth to it as that professional experience would. So another reason why we have some contradictions is because of what we call scientific versus anecdotal evidence. So this is typically what we see in the health provider space. So you may see, let's say, more conventional providers maybe recommend certain medications or certain diet changes, and then you see a functional medicine provider that's also a dietitian or the same type of provider, but they're recommending certain tests, or they're recommending certain supplements, or maybe they're recommending a different dietary approach, right? And everyone says that they're the one that's right and that the other people are wrong, and so you don't know what to do, right? This comes down to either scientific versus anecdotal evidence. So whenever we're looking at scientific evidence, this means that there have been well-designed studies, ideally on humans, that back up recommendations. So a great example of this is, let's say, the low FODMAP diet versus the SIBO diet for SIBO. One, there's been no research done in SIBO diet, so we'll kind of break it up for maybe low FODMAP diet and IBS, and SIBO diet for the SIBO IBS overlap. Are FODMAP troubles keeping you from enjoying your favorite foods? Our sponsor, FODZYME, can help you add these foods back to your diet. When sprinkled on or mixed with high FODMAP meals, FODZYME's novel enzyme blend breaks down the FODMAPs GOS, lactose, and fructan into more easily digestible carbohydrates, so you can enjoy your meals without the worry. I have personally used FODZYME all around the world, from Paris to New York City to my hometown of Nashville, and this has helped me eat out with more confidence, knowing I'm supported for my biggest triggers of garlic, onion, dairy, and beans. It is possible to enjoy food and eating out again without the worry of digestive discomfort, and FODZYME can help. Learn more at FODZYME.com and use the code GUTSHOW to save 20% off any single order. So the low FODMAP diet has lots of well-designed studies that show it is effective at reducing symptoms of IBS. There's a lot of scientific articles out there that back it up. So that is an evidence-based recommendation for those with IBS for that reason. Now, a SIBO diet that has been kind of branded for those who have that kind of overlap, right, with SIBO, it has not been studied. There are not well-designed human trials that show a benefit in terms of symptom reduction or in terms of decreased SIBO levels. However, anecdotal evidence is experiential evidence. So the people who created the SIBO diet and who pushed the SIBO diet forward are practitioners that found that using this diet in their practice led to beneficial outcomes for those patients. So it's a less strong recommendation But oftentimes, as practitioners, we will lean on anecdotal evidence in order to have more options and, again, more personalization for our patients that we don't have necessarily research studies for yet. The lack of research studies is typically based around funding and availability to do the research. So with funding, oftentimes the people funding research are the ones that are going to benefit in some way. Typically, pharmaceutical companies will do this, which is why we have so much research around medications. It's not a bad thing. It makes a lot of sense why that happens, but research is very expensive. And so a lot of times small recommendations like sleeping enough for your IBS symptoms may not be researched just due to lack of funding. No one's there to be the funding source, right? Another part is just the availability of doing the research. Not all human trials are going to be considered ethical and safe, and not all like diet changes or lifestyle modifications are easy to study in science. And so we don't see a lot of diet research out there, especially in humans, because it can be very difficult to actually do these trials and do these studies. So sometimes we lean on anecdotal evidence that is maybe science backed, right? The recommendations are backed by science that we do have available for that reason. The problem with this from an anecdotal perspective is that if we're leaning on anecdotal evidence too much, or let's say we are ignoring scientific evidence in order to push anecdotal evidence forward, which again, we see this a lot in the health and nutrition space, the anecdotal evidence doesn't always bring in the nuance or other considerations because it hasn't been truly tested. Also, these recommendations haven't been tested for a placebo and nocebo effect or even true efficacy that we see in our science-backed articles, right? Our scientific journals and our studies. And so there's a really fine line between utilizing anecdotal evidence in a way that is effective or utilizing it in a way that maybe is semi-harmful or even just kind of negligent, right? We have to be careful about these things as practitioners. And then as a consumer, this is something that you can also ask is like, where did this recommendation come from? And you can see if someone, can cite an article and you can go read the study yourself, that might be more of a scientific evidence backed up recommendation, which might be stronger, especially if it's your condition, your problems, the outcomes were exactly what you're looking for. The anecdotal evidence, what you want to ask is who came up with this, how long has it been used, and what all practitioners are using this in practice and what outcomes are they seeing, right? Because if it's just one person who wrote one book and they're recommending this, it may not be true across the board. And that's where, again, we see the most controversies and even contradicting information in health and nutrition. So that leads us to ask, well, what is then considered evidence-based? So if I'm looking for someone who practices in an evidence-based way, which is really what you want as a patient, according to me, you may not want that, and that's okay. But evidence-based information combines research, again, that scientific research, what all is available, with science-backed information, again, based on that research or based on what we know about certain mechanisms of action or certain functions in the body, how can we pull apart information from there? So we have our actual research and studies plus science-backed information plus professional expertise and experience with populations. That is what we consider to be evidence-based. So evidence-based practitioners, not every recommendation that they make is going to have a perfect randomized controlled trial that they can share with you. Because again, those aren't often available and they don't always exist. However, we can use our professional expertise through our training and our experience with other people and populations, backed by the science of what we know in terms of metabolism, again, mechanisms of action, certain nutrients, certain food, profiles and food ingredients and components, and even functions in the body. We can utilize all of that science that we do understand and put together recommendations that are considered still evidence-based and personalized to you. Now, if someone is just regurgitating information that they've heard from someone else, this can lead to a gap in this evidence-based recommendation because there's no professional expertise behind it, right? And so just regurgitating information does not mean it's truly evidence-based. Even if an article is cited, we really do need to understand the science and the why. Again, why is the recommendation being made? What are we targeting? And the professional expertise to understand who is this truly for, because this may not be for you in front of me. since it worked for Sally, it may not work for you. It may be for, Mark over here somewhere else, but what I need for you is going to be completely different based on the professional experience that I have, right? That is important. When it comes to evidence-based recommendations, and a bit of the blurry lines here is we always have to consider the safety, right? The safety is always a question to address when you are getting a recommendation, especially one that hasn't been thoroughly studied, especially one that hasn't been studied long-term. Is there any safety risk to this recommendation? And this is a problem we see, again, in a lot of this anecdotal practice, is that just because something's worked in practice doesn't mean that the long-term outcomes have been studied and the safety profiles have always been studied. So we have to understand the risks that are involved and how to weigh those out so that you know that because you're in control of all your health decisions. Like, you want to know that those decisions that you're making are going to be safe, right? And a big, key piece of this would be really significant diet changes. How is that going to impact you long term? And then especially around the use of supplements or even medications, that is a big one that you want to always assess to make sure that this isn't just something that has been used by someone else and they, are just going to try it out on you, but that the safety profile of these supplements is something that you're able to actually assess yourself too, right? That's really important. So all of these pieces together are really how these different varying recommendations from different providers in the same spaces will come to you, right? And some examples of this is you see like PCOS practitioners, some will recommend a gluten-free, dairy-free diet. Some are going to recommend a high protein diet. Some are recommending a Mediterranean diet. It doesn't mean that one of them is right and all the rest of them are wrong. Many times they're all kind of piecing together their own combination of science, the studies themselves, and their professional experience, right? And so everyone could be considered evidence-based, but still be providing different information. In the IBS space, we see whole food plant-based diet versus a low FODMAP diet versus a Mediterranean diet versus simply a gluten-free diet. Again, there's maybe use of all of these, and there's likely nuance to these, but certain practitioners may lean in a certain direction and kind of land on that. For optimal health, you see intuitive eating versus vegan versus paleo versus like a balanced Mediterranean diet, right? You're going to see all these recommendations. So how do you then know who to trust, right? Because this information may all be evidence-based, right? But what do you follow? How do you know? And I want to make sure to say, as someone who is a dietitian, I very much believe that credentials are helpful, but they do not always matter. Someone can be a credentialed health practitioner, like a registered dietitian, and not be providing truly evidence-based and personalized information for you. They could be cherry picking the information they're sharing. They could be leaning on personal experience. They could be leaning only on anecdotal evidence and not also the scientific studies that are out there, that we're not all created equal, right? And then also, having no credentials, you may have a really great education and experience. There's some legal sides to that to be really mindful of, and liabilities more on that person's side, but that doesn't mean that they are completely stripped of any trust or worthiness to follow, right? That wouldn't be fair to say. However, you can start with understanding credentials just to know, is this personal experience versus professional experience and training? And you can go a step further and say, okay, what's the depth and variety in this experience, right? You could ask, who do you work with? How long have you worked with that population? Where did this information come from? How did you develop these recommendations that you've made, or like your practice or what you're doing now? And that will give you an idea of not only their training, right? If you ask, okay, what credentials do you have? What degrees do you have? Where did you study? Where did you train? But also in their work, is there depth and is there variety in their experience? And does that overlap with your actual needs, right? If someone's only been working, let's say in the IBS space for 3 months, compared to someone who's been working in that space for 5 or 6 years, then there's going to be a difference, again, in that depth of experience, that is important for you to weigh out. The next thing that you want to think about is the message itself. Is the message that's being shared across the platform, across the blogs, wherever it may be, is that backed by a true why? Can that be explained? And is it open to personalization to each individual's needs, belief, history, culture, means, etc.? So this happens a lot when we see people in these big camps, right? Where it feels like everyone's saying something contradicting and they're saying everyone else is wrong. Great example is you should do intuitive eating, or do, carb counting for weight loss, or you should do low FODMAP diet only, or you should add all new foods to your diet and treat SIBO for IBS, right? There's so many different kind of contradicting opinions. And when someone is fully in just one single camp, oftentimes what's missing is the ability to personalize. So often what I look for in people that I trust in terms of mentors, or even as a patient myself, problems I may have, if I'm looking for other expertise, I'm going to look for someone who not only is able to explain the why behind things that they're recommending and what they're saying, but that their content and their information and what they provide has some nuance to it and the ability for me to personalize, because I know that that person is not going to just kind of stay in this box of what they believe without being open to expanding based on my case, but they're also more likely to be keeping up with new information that's coming out that's going to possibly benefit me and help me, right? It's not going to be based on bias. It's going to be based on, again, evidence-based information. The other thing that you can look for, especially as a red flag, are trends. Are people only going to follow what's hot, or are they sticking with the evolving evidence and science, right? There's a very big difference in changing recommendations because now it's a trend versus changing recommendations because the science evolved to give us a new recommendation, right? Some great examples of this. There's a blogger creator in the IBS space who is fairly problematic in our space. I won't say the name of them, but one big red flag that you see is that her recommendations have come from personal experience, and her recommendations of what she's doing to heal and recover are always changing based on what's trending at that time. So for a while, they were, everything was liquid, which kind of trended with this rise in the elemental diet and the SIBO kind of IBS space. And then she shifted to, more plant-based. Then she shifted to more keto. And now she's kind of in that space where there's not really a lot of variety. Sugar is the problem and carbs are the problem, right? There's a trend towards the trends themselves versus, again, really depth of understanding and consistency to the science that's available. Another great example would be, people who produce products in the health space and how they never made a recommendation until that product is trending and they created their own. Great examples would be probiotics. They popped out with a probiotic option. Collagen became hot. So now there's a collagen product and they're all about collagen. Bone broth became a big deal. So now that they're all about bone broth and that's what they're recommending for everybody. Again, those recommendations may be slightly tied to the evolving science and things that they're learning, but the camp itself is so strong now because the trend and then the money that follows the trend is there. Always be mindful about that and be aware of what's happening there. And then the biggest thing to consider, whether this be, a practitioner that you're working with in person or online, or whether this is someone that you're choosing to follow, on social media, or a blog that you're choosing to subscribe to, or a YouTube channel that you're subscribing to. Do you feel safe in their care? And are you the center of the care, or are they positioning themselves to be the center? This is very hard to consider as much in the social media space because I'm sharing this YouTube video or this podcast with you right now, and I am kind of positioned in the center in a way, right? An example in this space would be, is this all about me? As in, I am the best person here. You should follow everything I say. I am the expert. Just listen to me. Or is the information I'm sharing, these are the tools you can use. Here's education that you can understand, right? This is for you. I'm teaching you, right? That is an example of that positioning. In an actual healthcare relationship space, this is a little bit more evident and clear. If there are recommendations that are being made are like, okay, I want you to do this, this is what everyone does. This is the only option. And if it's not understood that it's really personal to you, or let's say you say, I actually would choose not to do that right now. What are my other options? And no other options are given. Do you know who I am? You should follow my recommendation. Here, I wrote a book, buy my product. That's a bit more positioning themselves versus personalizing to you. You should always have autonomy in your health decisions, and your practitioners or the people you're getting information from, the information online, they're not always going to be able to personalize it to you, but it should at least be presented in a way that you get to make the decision, not presented as a set of rules that you have to follow that may not be personalized to your actual needs, right? Or even have trust tied to it where you know that your best interests are in mind with those recommendations or rules that you're given. Lack of flexibility is usually a big red flag when it comes to healthcare and information online. So I know that this was a bit of a nuanced topic in and of itself, and there's probably so much more we could talk about. Again, if we had just an open dialogue, I think we could talk about this for so many more hours. But that's all I have for now. And I hope that it was helpful just to open up some thought processes about, where the controversies and that, contradictions come from, and even just how to navigate it, because that's the key. We're not going to get rid of them because oftentimes they're there for a real reason. And science is just that way. It's not actually as black and white as we want it to be, especially when it comes to health and nutrition and the gut. It gets more and more complex as we get more and more research and more information. So I don't think that the contradictions are really going to go away, but I do think the way that we navigate them can be improved and help with some of the overwhelm around them. Like I said at the beginning, I do want to hear your thoughts on this and kind of your takeaways. So please share on social media. You can share where we posted the episode. You can share in our Facebook community. If you're in our membership, that information's in there in the show notes too, but you can share with us in that private community, however you feel comfortable, because I would love to keep that dialogue open and help give a space for you to process those thoughts yourself, as well as add to the conversation. Thank you again for tuning in, and I hope to see you again next week on The Gut Show. Are you struggling with frustrating GI symptoms, gut issues, or maybe even IBS, and you really need support and guidance from a well-trained, qualified professional? If that is you, the Gut of 8 team of dietitians may be exactly what you are looking for. We personalize every plan for our clients based on their assessment, their medical history, and what actually is working or not working in their body. We do this through close follow-ups every 2 to 3 weeks, all virtual. We also do weekly check-ins on every single client, and we are available for our clients through email and messaging support throughout the week and their entire program. Imagine this to be that hand-in-hand care that helps you reach your goals more efficiently, but also with more confidence and knowledge that you can use throughout the rest of your life. If that is what you are looking for, you can start with a consult call where we can talk a bit more about your history, what you're looking for, and what you need, and if we can help. You can find the link to schedule a consult call in the show notes if you are interested. We can't wait to talk to you, and we hope to work with you to help you reach your goals.